Peace be upon you, brothers and sisters. Today's video we're going to, inshallah, wrap up our analysis or reading of the third word. I would like to first read some of what we went over in our previous video. So the Risale-i is telling us that man has endless needs, and he also has endless enemies. Okay, so it says, man is in need of numberless things, and he is subject to endless calamities. So he has endless needs, and he has endless enemies. Okay, and it says here, his capital is as nothing, and his power too is as nothing. Okay, so in this context, capital refers to everything we have. Okay, and power here also means our free will, because the only actual power we have is our free will. All of we do, all of our actions are created by God, okay? So the only thing that we have, any power we have, is our free will, okay? And the Risale-i is telling us that that his capital is as nothing, okay? So our capital cannot attain our endless needs, okay? And it's also telling us that our power too is nothing, so our power cannot protect us from our endless enemies, okay? So what do? Well, we can find great profit and happiness and bounty by worshiping God, affirming his unity, so affirming the oneness of God, relying on God, and submitting to him, okay? Now, we will look back at this paragraph when we now look at this, analyze this next paragraph. In the name of Allah, the most beneficent, the most merciful. It is obvious that a safe way is preferable to a harmful way, even if the possibility of its safety is only 1 in 10. But on the way of worship, which are matter here, there is 9 out of 10 possibility of it leading to the treasury of eternal happiness, as well as its being safe. While it is established by the testimony, which is at the degree of consensus of innumerable experts and witnesses, that besides being without benefit, and the dissolute even confess to this, the way of vice and dissipation ends in eternal misery. According to the reports of those who have uncovered the mysteries of creation, this is absolutely certain. Okay, so let's just stop and try to understand what the Risale-i is telling us. So, first of all, it is obvious that a safe way is preferable to a harmful way. So let's say there are 2 paths that you can take. Okay, now one of the paths are unsafe and one of the other path is safe. Okay, so one path is harmful, the other one is not. Now, which path would you want to take? Well, you would want to take the path that's safe, right? Even if the possibility of its safety is only 1 in 10. So let's say there are 2 paths, both of them are unsafe. Both of them are unsafe, but one of them is a little bit more safe. There's a slightly higher possibility of its being more safe. Now, you would want to take that path, okay? Even if, once again, even if the possibility of safety is only a little bit, right, you would still want to take that path, right? But on the way of worship, which are matter here, so on the path of worship, which is through worshiping God by submitting to his religion, by following the prophets, by following the Quran, okay, which are matter here, right? So this is what we're discussing. This is what concerns us. There is 9 out of 10 possibility of it leading to the treasury of eternal happiness. So the path of worship, if you take the path of worship, there's a 9 out of 10, 9 out of 10 possibility of the path being safe, and also it leading to the treasury of eternal happiness. The treasury of eternal happiness here is actually talking about heaven, right? Paradise, the place, the abode of bliss and happiness and reward in the afterlife. However, it's important to keep in mind here, when it's talking about the treasury of eternal happiness, right? The path of worship leading to the treasury of eternal happiness, it's not just talking about heaven or in the next life, right, in the afterlife. Paradise, right, heaven can also be in this world, okay? You can also turn this life into paradise, right? Some people might say, you haven't come to this world to be happy, right? You can't be happy. This world isn't paradise. You have to, that's in the next life. But actually, this world can also be paradise. You can also be happy in this life, okay? And that's by taking the path of worship, okay? As well as it's being safe, okay? So by worshiping God, right? By taking the path of worship, you can also be happy in this life as well, right? While it is established by the testimony, which is at the degree of consensus of innumerable experts and witnesses, that besides being without benefit, and the dissolute even confess to this, the way of vice and dissipation ends in eternal misery. Okay? So when it talks about the testimony at the degree of consensus, this is talking about all of the scholars and mystics and saints in the religion of Islam and also other religions of revelation, okay, who have testified to this, okay, and even the dissolute confess to this, okay. So even those on the path of vice and dissipation confess to this. The path of vice and dissipation ends in eternal misery, okay, and when the dissolute confess this, right, they might not just confess it, right? Even if they don't, it can be manifested in their actions, okay? So when it talks about vice and dissipation ends in eternal misery, this is also talking about hell in the afterlife. But it's also talking about, and this is once again important to keep in mind, it's also talking about hell in this world, okay? So if you don't take the path of worship, right, which can lead to happiness in this life, if you instead take the path of vice, if you take the path of dissipation, okay? So if you take the path of the fasiqeen, okay, those who are rebellious, disobedient to God, it will turn this life into misery. It will turn this life into misery. Now, it's really interesting. In the second word, there's something really interesting that that a person says in this analogy or story that's given. So to just give some context, there's like two men who go into a country. One of the men has belief, and the other man doesn't have belief. Okay. Now the man who doesn't have belief sees the country in a very negative way. Okay. So he sees destruction, he sees suffering, he sees oppression. Right. He sees all of these horrible things, and the horrible things that he's seeing around him causes him suffering as well. Okay. And the only way he can try to cope with that is by drinking alcohol. Okay, is by drinking and temporarily forgetting about it. Okay, and it's really interesting because the other man with belief, when he comes across the other man, right, the one who doesn't have belief, right, the man with belief, talks some sense into him, and the man who saw the country in a very negative way says something very interesting here. He says, "Yes, I was crazy through a drink. May God be pleased with you. You have saved me from a hellish state." So I want to repeat that again. May God be pleased with you. You have saved me from a hellish state. A hellish state. So this man, as I just said, he suffers. He's suffering because he doesn't have belief, right? He doesn't believe in God, right? He doesn't recognize God as the supreme ruler of the universe, right? So he sees the universe, he sees the world in a state of anarchy, okay? He sees everything as a weeping orphan. He sees everything as a corpse, okay? He sees everything as an enemy, okay? And he suffers because of this. He becomes miserable, okay? And what this shows is that you can turn this life of yours also into a kind of hell, right? Hell is not just in the afterlife. It's not just in the afterlife. You can also turn this life into hell if you don't have belief, if you take the path of vice and dissipation, if you don't obey God, if you're rebellious to God, okay? And one note to make here, for example, some people say, why does God want us to worship him? Well, the thing is, God doesn't need our worship. He doesn't need our worship. God commands us to worship him because we need to worship, right? It's for our own good. So think about it like this. If a doctor, let's say you're sick, okay, you're a patient and you're sick, and the doctor offers you a remedy, okay? Now you want to say something like, well, what need do you have of, for example, giving this to me? Well, the doctor doesn't need it. The doctor doesn't need the remedy, but you do, right? Why? Because you're sick, right? So the same thing here, God doesn't need us to worship him, but we need to worship him, right? We need it. Why? Because by worshiping God, we're able to secure our endless needs, and we're able to fortify ourselves against our enemies, okay? So when God forbids us from doing certain things, right, it's for our own good, okay? So think about it, right? God prohibits drinking, or drinking alcohol, okay? Well, look at people who drink alcohol, right? Like, they end up suffering. Families get torn apart, they lose their jobs, they lose their friends, right? They suffer a lot, okay? Or people who gamble, right? For example, I heard about this person who gambled, right? They would go to the casino and they would gamble, and they ended up in a lot of debt, and they ended up suffering a lot from that, right? So the things that we do that are forbidden by God, they cause us suffering, and they can turn this life into a sort of hell, okay? So imagine this, okay? Let's say you drink and you become drunk, and in just 1 minute of fury, you kill someone, okay? And you end up in prison for 30 years. Look at the misery that you've caused yourself, right? Because from 1 minute of anger, just from 1 minute of anger, of fury, right? You kill someone, and then you end up in prison for 30 years, right? So this really goes to show how doing things that God has prohibited us from doing, right? Disobeying God, right, causes us suffering and can turn this life into hell, okay? So the important thing here is that hell is not just in this life. Hell is not just in this. What I mean by that is, like, if you don't believe, right? So if you don't have belief, if you disobey God, and you do the things that he's prohibited you from doing, you can turn this life into hell. And then, you could also be punished in the hell in the next life, okay? But the same thing with heaven, right? You can turn this life into a kind of heaven, into a kind of paradise, by taking the path of worship. And you can also, inshallah, go to paradise in the next life as well, okay? So according to the reports of those who have uncovered the mysteries of creation, this is absolutely certain. So this is once again referring to all the scholars and mystics and saints from the religion of Islam and other religions of revelation as well, that what's certain is that those who have taken the path of worship will be happy both in this life and the next. And those who have taken the path of vice, the path of disobedience to God, will end up in misery, both in this life and the next. Okay? So reading the next paragraph, like that of the hereafter, happiness in this world lies in worship and being a soldier for Almighty God, in which case we should constantly say praise be to God for obedience to him and success. We should thank him that we are Muslims. So, once again, like that of the hereafter. So just like how we can be happy in the hereafter, in the afterlife, happiness in this world lies in worship and being a soldier for Almighty God. Now, how does worship make us happy? Right, in one of the in the 2 paragraphs ago, it was saying that you can find great profit, happiness, and bounty in worship, affirming God's unity, relying on God, and submitting to him, right? Worship makes us happy. Why? Because remember, we have endless needs and we have endless enemies. So we fortify ourselves from our enemies, and we're able to secure our needs by worshiping God, okay? And we're also able to connect to God, okay? And being a soldier of Almighty God, this doesn't mean anything like military. This is just like a example or analogy that was given. But when it talks about being a soldier for Almighty God, right? what does a soldier do? A soldier obeys the orders of his commander, right? If he doesn't, then he would be considered like a renegade, right? He wouldn't be considered like he wouldn't be considered a soldier then. He would be like a renegade, right? So when it talks about being a soldier for Almighty God, this is talking about obeying God, right? Conforming to Him, right? Not being rebellious to Him. Okay, and as we've seen that when you are rebellious to God, when you take the path of the fasiqeen, that can cause you misery, can cause you suffering. Okay? In which case, we should constantly say, praise be to God for obedience to Him and success, and we should thank Him that we are Muslims. So, even when we are obedient to God and we are successful, right, this obedience to God and the success we have comes from God as well. Okay? And we should thank Him that we are Muslims. Okay. Now, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you were able to benefit from it. And inshallah, I will see you guys next time.